Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Bakes here, and thank you for joining me for today's episode of my TerraVision reviews, where for the first time within this series, we're actually going to be covering a movie, which I know sounds kind of weird and sort of goes against the whole idea of what the TerraVision review series is, covering horror-related TV shows and that. But if you want to stick around to the end of today's review, I don't want to explain it at the start because I'd prefer to just get into the meat and potatoes of this review and cover all that stuff before I get into explaining why. Come to the end of this video and I'll leave an explanation for why I think something like this is something that I will cover going forward in my TerraVision review series. But without delaying any longer, let's get into today's film from 2003, and it is Scooby-Doo and the Monster of Mexico. So, I've spoken about it on my channel before. I'm a massive Scooby-Doo fan. Like, this was my bread and butter growing up. I watched all the animated movies. I loved the live-action films as well. Scooby-Doo is just one of my all-time favorite forms of media, whether it's movies, TV shows, things like that. And The Monster of Mexico is definitely not a movie that is foreign to me. It has been a long time since I last checked it out, but it is one that I did watch a lot growing up, and it was a fun one to come back for today's review. So, as I normally do, let's start by going through the plot for this film before I get into my thoughts of it. So, the plot for this one is the Mystery Inc. gang are invited to Mexico when Fred's pen pal, who I can't remember the name of right now, invites them there for a Mexican holiday to experience just the Mexican culture and things like that. However, their arrival happens at the same time as these chupacabra attacks start to happen, and they're scaring the locals and scaring away tourism, so the gang decide to figure out the mystery behind these chupacabra sightings and attacks. Now, first of all, the chupacabra in this movie is described as and shown as Mexico's version of Bigfoot, and clearly the creators or writers didn't know what a chupacabra was. As a massive cryptid fan myself, I'm going to give you a little bit of lore here. Chupacabra translates to goat sucker, and normal descriptions of the actual cryptid in real life are described as either a monstrous feral dog-looking thing or a humanoid reptilian kangaroo alien looking thing. Okay, it's never really described as a Mexican Bigfoot, but the reason why I'm more so lenient on the depiction of a chupacabra in this movie is because there is a massive backstory behind what this movie was meant to be compared to what it turned out to be. So I don't really want to go into that crazy backstory because that is a massive rabbit hole that I could just consume this whole video with, but there is a backstory to where this movie was originally meant to be something else called Scooby-Doo Beware the Bigfoot or something like that. So they clearly just sort of grabbed two different scripts and merged them together, and this is the end product. So I'm not completely hurt that it's not a true depiction of a chupacabra, and I know I'm being nerdy, especially considering this is a fucking Scooby-Doo animated movie. But it's even funny in this one because they do honestly call it a Bigfoot just as much or even more than a chupacabra, so there you go. I guess that's where we'll start with the monster design, because that's a big part for people who are fans of Scooby-Doo, you know, the cool monster designs and the villains and things like that. The monster design in this one is just okay, it's fine. The first few appearances of the chupacabra actually really work well. It's in low light, normally shown in like a silhouette with like glowing green eyes, and it's really big, really menacing, and like that version of what we see early in this movie is really cool. However, once the full reveal of the chupacabra happens and you see it within light and a lot more detail and color is shown, it loses points there. You know, on the cover here it's purple. It's not quite purple in the movie, it's more of like a maroon or something like that, but the more detail that's revealed, it sort of loses cool points. But at the end of the day, it's still a fine design, and definitely not the worst that we've seen in Scooby-Doo. But for considering it's meant to be a chupacabra, it's not exactly accurate to the real life cryptid. Hopefully my cryptid nerds out there are relating. But then also, I just think like a darker tone to this design would have been cooler, where I said, earlier in the movie where it's just silhouette and, you're seeing it in low light and less detail. I think that's where it's more menacing. Something I do really like about this movie is the Mexican setting. It's just nice to have something a little bit different and a little bit foreign. It was very common of this era of Scooby-Doo, being the early 2000s What's New Scooby-Doo era, to do a lot of globe-trotting through their movies and TV series as well. They go to Australia and deal with vampires. They go to Scotland and deal with the Loch Ness Monster. Here they go to Mexico, deal with the Chupacabra. It was very common for the gang to be doing globe-trotting mysteries throughout this era of the show. I'm not sure how accurate it is to Mexican culture and customs, just because I'm not very knowledgeable myself. But it has some cool stuff going on. It has the Day of the Dead festival happening at the same time, which is something I do know is part of Mexican culture. Learning some history is kind of cool, but again, you got to consider it's through the lens of trying to teach someone between the age of like 5 and 10, because that's what it's targeted towards. But the cool bits of history we do get is kind of nice. The characters that we get added around the gang are decent, but nothing overly noteworthy. We've had better side characters in Scooby-Doo before, but these ones aren't really screaming to be brought up again. Even the gang themselves are very much standard in this movie. There's no development for any of their characters or like stories to build up on. And I know you guys are going to be saying like it's fucking Scooby-Doo. Again, it's targeted towards people at the age of like 5 and 10. But there's been Scooby-Doo before this movie and after this movie, where even in the short runtime that these films are, like this one for example is like an hour and 10 minutes, they give the gang their own storylines and development to have. Here it's pretty much the gang in Mexico, and that's pretty much it. So don't expect much development or storylines for the Mystery Inc. gang themselves. Velma and Daphne, it is noteworthy that their most iconic voice actors aren't in this film. I can't remember their most iconic voice actors off the top of my head, especially Velma's. I want to say the most iconic voice for Daphne was, what was her name? Gray? Something Gray, or maybe her first name was Gray, I can't remember. But you've got Casey Kasem as Shaggy, Frank Welker as Scooby and Fred. But yeah, it is noteworthy. If you are a Scooby-Doo fan, you are going to pick up that's not usually the most iconic voice for both Velma and Daphne. The animation as well, again, this is the early 2000s What's New Scooby-Doo era. It's not great. Growing up, the What's New Scooby-Doo era used to be my favourite. It still possibly could be my favourite version of the show, but the movies have definitely teetered a bit for myself. Just very simple designs, the colours are very saturated, like there's barely any fucking shading going on, like the animation isn't great. It really is highlighted with characters like Scooby-Doo and then the monster itself, but then, the rest of it is just, like the background characters, they might as well just be fucking, made by a preschooler, honestly. The animation really isn't that deep. Good original theme song for this movie. I believe it goes under the name Fever Mexico. Again, this era of Scooby-Doo, or just honestly Scooby-Doo in general, was very common for having like a song inserted during a montage or like a chase scene or something like that. But this era in particular often had like original theme songs. The Fever Mexico that plays during the opening menu and then during one of the opening sequences. It's very catchy, so good music in this one as well, at least. Now obviously, because this is Scooby-Doo, there is someone who is revealed to be behind the mask and portraying the monster and having their reasons to why. In this movie, it is very obvious who is behind the mask and portraying the monster. I don't ever remember a Scooby-Doo movie being like this obvious as who is behind the mask. Like I was trying to think back to watching this movie when I was younger and thinking like, was it that obvious? But then again, I was a dumb kid, so it probably went over my fucking head. But it is very obvious in this movie, so there's really not much of a mystery going on here. I'm so over the trope. It's got sort of nothing to do with the person behind the mask, but the trope of this happening in Scooby-Doo and just mystery movies in general, where something happens to a character off screen and you sort of just have to take their word for it. It's a very annoying red herring. It's just kind of like, a character comes out of nowhere and they go, oh, where were you during the attack? And they go, oh, I got knocked out, and when I woke up the monster was gone, and you never saw any of that happen. You just sort of have to take their word. It's just very annoying, and it's a very like lazy red herring as well. Big portions of this movie are just kind of nothing, and that's unfortunate because again, this is a movie where the runtime is only like 70 minutes, something like that. It's very, very short. There are chase sequences, montages. Okay, that's fine because it's Scooby-Doo and that is very common to happen in Scooby-Doo, but there is far too many. it adds no development, because you can put development in montages and chase scenes and everything. Like, it's subtle and it's quick, of course, but you can do it. But here it feels like it's just there to fill out the runtime. If you took out the chase sequences and montages in this one, not only would it not affect the story at all, the movie would probably be only 50 minutes by that point, because there is just so many sequences like that in this movie. This is kind of peaking how much Scooby-Doo can be over the top and ridiculous as well, especially one segment in this movie where they visit a Mexican museum / like amusement park thing, and it's a massive portion of this movie as well. It eats up so much of the runtime, but it sort of like suspends your disbelief in a crazy way. And again, I know I'm fucking sounding stupid because this is a Scooby-Doo animated movie and I'm a fucking grown adult, but they have like these flying giant animatronics and these big stone animatronics that are portraying giants and dragons and things like that, and it's meant to make you believe like this is like something that's somewhat possible in like some world of reality, and it just takes you too far out of it from what should be like a somewhat grounded mystery with like a chupacabra and something like that, where the chupacabra isn't doing anything too overly superhuman or something like that. I just find that portion of the movie to be a drag to get through. And not only that, during that museum sequence, as I said, it goes on for ages, and it just gets to a point where you start thinking, wasn't the chupacabra / Bigfoot the antagonist of this movie? Because now it just feels like these museum animatronics and giants and things like that are becoming the nuisances, and it that portion of the movie like really bugs me when like I just wanted to get back to the Bigfoot. And again, it's meant to be a chupacabra. There I am saying it like they were in the movie, getting them mixed up. But I mean, to wrap up my thoughts, because I don't want to go too deep into something with a 70-minute runtime, and at the end of the day it is only a Scooby-Doo animated direct-to-DVD feature. But considering all that, like I said, I love Scooby-Doo. I grew up like really liking this movie. Now that I'm older, I can see definitely it's not as good as I remember it being. But with that being said, there's definitely worse ones out there. This one still has a sense of nostalgia hit with me. So I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10 for Scooby-Doo and the Monster of Mexico from 2003. So there we go, guys. Like I said, if you stuck around to this portion of the video, I was going to explain why I thought it was okay to cover Scooby-Doo and the Monster of Mexico, and why you should expect more Scooby-Doo content and Scooby-Doo movies and other like animated horror adjacent family friendly kind of things to pop up in a series like my TerraVision reviews. It's because a lot of these, I'm going to just use the Scooby-Doo movies again as an example. They were direct to DVD, but often they would get replayed on TV all the time. Like growing up, I saw this movie on TV more times than I can count. I also rented it from the video store more times than I can count growing up. So it has had a fair, lifespan within TV and, playing on the small screen and things like that. But then also, like I said plenty of times in this video, I'm a massive fan of Scooby-Doo. I don't know any other series on my channel that can, allow me to cover Scooby-Doo. You can't do it in my random horror series because it's just not horror, it doesn't fit that mold. But again, I just feel like it sort of fits the mold enough for TerraVision reviews. So going forward, come to expect, Scooby-Doo content, Halloween specials of like other kids related stuff. So like, I've got plenty of seasons of SpongeBob somewhere in this room. I'll do a SpongeBob Halloween episode. I've got South Park in here. I got The Simpsons as well. So come to expect that sort of stuff going through this series as well. But these TV shows that have had movies that are played on TV and stuff like that, come to expect that. I'm doing too much justifying for talking about something that I just honestly want to talk about, so get off my back. But thank you for joining me for today's review, guys. As I said, Scooby-Doo, the Monster of Mexico, not as good as I remember it being, but it's watchable. It held my attention span for the hour that I gave it. So 6 out of 10. Thank you for joining me, guys. Let me know some of your favorite Scooby-Doo animated films. Maybe I'll cover them in the future. I've got a big portion somewhere in this room as well, but this is just one I felt like covering for a debut movie within the TerraVision review series. But thanks for joining me, guys, and I'll see you later. Peace.